Today, we're getting the insights from Collin Eye, an indie game developer from Dallas, Texas, who started Et al. Games. Collin, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, tell me about the game that you're working on now.
Yeah, so the game that we actually just shipped this week is called The Art of Flight. It's available on Steam right now. You can go check it out. And it is a action arcade game about flying multiple ships simultaneously. I kind of describe it as a space ballet. So it's very much a kind of like adaptation or riff on like classic arcade games like Galaga, Geometry Wars, things like that. And the game is kind of all about what happens to your sense of kind of like your own sense of self and your embodiment in a game, like your kinesthetic experience, when you're spread out into all of these multiple ships simultaneously, right? So it's like you have one ship that avoids an asteroid and that pushes your other ship into the line of enemy fire. And then you do a barrel roll with that guy and then lock on missiles with this other guy, kind of just creating these emergent little narrative moments in an arcade game context.
That's a pretty unique play point. How do you control the two? Are they separate?
Yeah, so you control all of your ships because you can have more than two, all with the left stick. So they all move like simultaneously, right? So you've kind of got this collective squadron of ships moving around, and just like in Galaga, right? There's these little captured guys kind of floating down. You can rescue them and add them to your squadron. And one of the kind of like, I mean, I guess there's a lot of novel mechanics in the game, but the real key one is you have the ability, we call it the solo ability, to freeze time and rearrange one of your ships, right? So you can like freeze time for everyone, but one of your guys gets to move around and shoot. So you can use that to create different squad formations. So sometimes, like against a boss, maybe you want to be like packed really tightly, so you have a lot of bullets like on one column to do a ton of damage. Other times, maybe flying around an asteroid field, you want to spread out a little bit more so that you aren't, getting like shoved through a narrow passageway and losing a bunch of your ships. And since you have all these ships, they each serve as like a life, right? So if you got like 10 guys on screen, that's essentially 10 lives, and that lets you do a lot of I think really kind of creative player expression things with how you're different strategies. And one of the things that I like seeing people do is how they approach these different stages, right? Do they like being spread out? Do they try to cast like a very wide area? Do they split up into separate squadrons? Do they come really close together? And like how do they change that format on different encounters?
So, is this an early access or a demo, or is this the complete game that's out now?
This is the complete game. Definitely looking at kind of like post-launch content. I've got some ideas for like other bosses and things that we could add to the game. But yeah, the main game is done. We've got like more than 100 episodes. There's 8 boss fights. We've got 5 game modes. It's got like local co-op. It's got a versus mode. So yeah, it's a fully featured package.
How long were you working on it?
A little over 2 years, mostly part time. So my full time job is I teach game programming and game design at the community college here, and so I was working on that. Yeah, like I said, probably 20, 30 hours a week on. Partially on my own, sometimes with my friend Heather, who's done a lot of the graphics programming on that. And then I also work with a lot of local artists that I know from the Society of Play group here in Dallas, and they've contributed a lot to like the visual quality of the game. So my friend Kalish did like backgrounds and stuff. My friend Sam and Kevin and Jose did a lot of the like ship design and modeling and texturing and stuff like that.
How about the game design aspect? Did you start with like a game design document or just kind of do it as you went along?
Yeah, just really do it as I went along. We had a kind of like game jam version that I had done 2022, I think, maybe 2021. That was wound up being a quite different game in a lot of ways, but I had the core idea of you're controlling multiple ships simultaneously, and it's like Galaga, right? Had that kind of core to it. Yeah, in general, I don't really use design documents. I'm the primary designer on really everything that I work on, and I take a lot of notes. I have maybe you would consider a game design document. There's long pages, but it's definitely more of a internal document for me and less a kind of external document, directing the team. That stuff tends to be a little bit more ad hoc, just through conversation, or maybe like the art team might get specific documents about, okay, here are like the colors that we're using so far, like here's things that we need to worry about with like color contrast or kind of stylistic cohesion with different enemies. But yeah, I'm definitely more of a kind of ad hoc approach to things than writing design docs.
So you said you spent several years on the game, and I know this isn't your first game. Was this the first game that you've properly released?
No, this would be the second full release. So our first game, which was me and Heather primarily working on that, and that one came out in 2021. It's called Changes. It's a puzzle game, so it's like a Sokoban about pushing blocks around. So if you've played something like Steven Sausage Roll or Baba Is You, it's kind of in that same genre. And yeah, that one we released in 21, and then I took a break, did some prototyping for different ideas and different jams, and then this was the project that we felt had the shortest time frame on executing. Right, also like smaller art budget, more kind of manageable scope, all those things. And yeah, so this will be is our second release.
How long did the other game take?
The other game was also about 2.5 to 3 years. That one was a lot more part time, though, partially just because I had less experience as a programmer, so a lot more just trying to learn things. And also we were kind of doing that simultaneously with some other projects that we were working on. So I would take 3-4 months off of that project and then kind of come back to it when I felt like I had a design, breakthrough or idea that I wanted to try out.
What kind of tech stack are you using?
Yeah, so we are using a custom engine written in C++ for all of our stuff. So obviously we use a lot of external tools like Blender, especially on our flight has been a big one. I use like Reaper for audio stuff. But yeah, the game engine itself is just a C++ game engine with Vulkan and DX12 like rendering backends.
Wow, I don't see custom game engines that often anymore. It's almost always Unity or Unreal I hear of.
Yeah, I think those are definitely. I mean, I'm sure those are the most popular. I'm always kind of surprised when you see those like Steam surveys, right? Sometimes people report what they're working on, and custom engine tends to be around like 25 to 30%. Even though I feel like I don't hear that as often. Um, I I'm a really big fan of going like the custom engine route, especially having just finished kind of the whole last couple months on this game and polishing things for like performance reason, fixing bugs, all those things. You really start to see the benefits of a custom engine when I mean, I just know all of the bits and pieces. I kind of understand how they fit together, but also I'm able to make like very granular decisions kind of based on the data about how to eke out performance. Like I was doing stuff to support the Steam Deck, right? Because I like playing games on the Steam Deck, so I wanted this to run really well there. And just looking at like, okay, how does our physics system work? What are some wins that we can get here? And for the programmers out there, we were doing like a lot of quaternion stuff for physics bodies, but projectiles don't really rotate in this game, so we were able to kind of create like a hot path for that and just say, oh well, hey, if like 80% of our physics objects don't need this, we can just kind of pipe these through here. And so for those reasons, I really like custom engines. I think there's a lot of benefits. The way I always kind of like to describe it is that you pay a lot more upfront. Like the friction is just higher at the beginning, obviously, than if I download like Unity or something. But it creates I think a much smoother kind of sailing experience towards the midpoint and the end of the project. In my experience, at least.
So you mentioned a lot of the good reasons. Were there any moments where you were banging your head against the wall or wished you didn't go that route or faced any big challenges?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily to quite that level of despair, but certainly, I mean, there's definitely negatives to it, right? I mean, one thing is just on like the tooling side of things, right? I mean, like when I started the game, it was just me and Heather doing stuff. We weren't even necessarily sure if we were going to be working with an artist because we were still trying to figure out like how's the game going to look, what things do we need. So tooling is certainly something that Unreal and Unity are better at providing. That said, we have in for the Art of Flight at least, right? Our art pipeline was very simple, so it wasn't too much of a headache. The other thing is just dealing with like graphics drivers, man. It's no fun. Things like, oh well, it works fine on these 4 machines, but on this machine, the shader just does one weird thing every 90 seconds. And so I'm just doing like, screen grabs and debugging it. Like that stuff is not particularly fun, but also maybe this is a sunk cost fallacy, right? But I've been doing engine development for long enough that I'm like committed to the train. So I know maybe that makes the despair worse, right? Because I'm like, well, there's no off ramp, right? I can't just go switch to Unity. I'm just stuck debugging this HLSL shader forever, and hopefully I fix it.
Did you build any auxiliary tools like a level editor or anything?
Yeah, we did. So most of the tools in this game, at least, are actually like just text-based tools. So like for a lot of the levels, they're like the like test levels and stuff, right? I just have a little like scripting language to kind of specify what objects spawn at what time. Because in a shmup, in a normal like kind of 3D level editor, it's a lot about like placing objects, kind of defining the level geometry. In a shmup, it's a lot more tied to like a timeline, so it kind of makes sense to just say, hey, I've got a set of time, and I'm issuing commands at certain markers. Like I want this thing to happen 4 seconds after this other thing. For the music, I also use a like custom scripting language, which it's really just a sequencer. It's not too advanced. But then we also have like a little like level editor thing that we use for like entity definitions. Like a boss has 8 turrets, right? You drag the little transforms around and say where the bullets spawn and that type of thing. But yeah, overall on this project, the tooling needs were pretty low. For our other games that we've done in this engine, yeah, we have had more maybe like traditional, yeah, like level editing tools and things like that.
Do you have any plans to open up the level editor for people or allow modding or anything?
Probably not, but I'm not. That's not like from any position of opposition. I just haven't had a lot of interest from people in that. Maybe as like a post-launch feature. So there is an idea I have for like a post-launch thing that's there's this the way we do the tutorial in this game is this kind of like montage sequence. So it's very similar to like WarioWare, if you've ever played that, or the game Ape Out, which came out a couple years ago. So because that's kind of like a montage sequence, these little short snippets of a level, and then it switches to the other one. I would certainly be open to like exposing that tool to people if they want to make their own montages or something. I just haven't had a lot of people express interest in that, so it hasn't seemed worth looking into. But hey, if anyone listening to this thinks that's cool, shoot me a message.
Well, this video I'm going to post on my Dev Dungeon YouTube channel, which
Okay,
is
yeah.
an audience of a lot of developers. So I think they would love modding games. I even have some videos up on like modding Minecraft and stuff. On X, I'm going to post the video too, and I have kind of two audiences, which is the game composer and the sound design world, and the developers too. Because I like doing the music. I'm passionate about both coding and music. So I am interested to hear a little more about how you use Reaper and this custom uh, sequencer that you made.
Yeah. So the the idea for the music in the game, because the title is The Art of Flight. This is kind of a pun on the Art of Fugue, that classical piece by Bach, right? Which, and of course, uh, fugue in Latin is just flight, so that's kind of where the pun. And of course, a fugue in music is you've got all these different voices, kind of playing separate things, but that are weaving in and out of each other. You've got in Art of Flight, you've got all these ships that are weaving in and around each other and doing this. So the idea for the music in the game is I wanted it to all be like dynamically generated by events in the game, right? So rather than having a lot of like traditional sound effects and kind of like a backing score to it, I wanted to essentially when an event happens in the game, like let's say you hit an enemy with a bullet, then it's going to just kind of like ping that sequencer and say, oh hey, we got an event that something got hit. Look up where you are in this like musical sequence, and then find the appropriate note to play, right? And so that's what the scripting language is for. I was really inspired by a couple of things. One of them was Terry Riley's piece in C, which I hadn't heard of until I started working on this game, but it's like a minimalist piece of music, and I really like minimalism, like Steve Reich and Philip Glass. So in this piece, he gives like an orchestra, essentially everyone gets these little like snippets, right? So they might be like 1 or 2 bars of a musical phrase, and then the orchestra's role is to kind of find a way to improvise this and put this together in a compelling way. And so I was inspired by that compositional technique, and so that's how I did a lot of the things for the music. Like the different events have these very short, they're really only like 2 measure phrases. So you might have a 2 measure phrase for the an enemy getting hit, and a 2 measure phrase for the player using their boost ability, and then another 2 measure phrase for like the power up ability activating, right? And so those things kind of get in and out of phase with each other, just in the sense that the boost and the bogey hit sound aren't always playing the same phrase or the same section of their piece simultaneously. So you get a lot of like interesting dynamics of pieces playing off of each other in that way. And the scripting language is really just as simple as kind of specifying. I just write it in text, but it's just got a list of notes, and it's like every time that sequencer gets pinged, it's going to play the next note in the sequence, and then if let's say it's 2.4 seconds, right, or something for the measure, and let's say it's only played 2 of those notes, and then it moves to the next section, it'll just start that new section from the beginning, right? So you can get these kind of I don't know, almost like abortive or like cut off sections that create, again, different dynamics of the way they like lead into each other and things like that.
So do you have like exported wave files that are playing, or is it actually like generating triangle waves and stuff?
No, yeah, it's just exporting wave files, and I am really interested in the more like generative, essentially making a synthesizer, right? That seems very cool. Partially, it was maybe just out of scope on this project, where like it was another big technical thing to do, but also this was really like my first experience doing I've played music for years, but I haven't really done like a bigger composition, right? Certainly not something with like 6 or 7 voices that are supposed to be playing off of each other and sounding nice together. So I learned a lot about audio production doing this type of stuff, and yeah, it just seemed like the easier approach was to use just like VSTs, right? Partially also just for experimentation, because I'm sure if you're an actual like practice composer that knows this stuff, you go, oh well, hey, if I've got flutes doing this and I've got this other voice playing simultaneously, I want to use like maybe this sound or that sound. I don't have that good of an auditory imagination, so the way I do it is just, okay, plug in this instrument. Does that sound good? It's like, oh, turns out like flutes and plucked strings are way too high, like they're occupying the same place in the register, and so it feels very like low. There's nothing in the bass, and it feels very like too twangy or something. And then I'll just try a different instrument and kind of poking around until something feels good, but also kind of on theme for what's going on in the game. So my last game changes was done entirely on this little like Korg synthesizer that I have over here, which was a process that I really liked, and I started trying to do that for Art of Flight, but it just felt like I didn't have a strong enough grasp on like timbre and texture in audio, so the workflow was just very very slow. It was much easier to do this stuff in in a DAW and just say, all right, generate 40 wave files for all these individual notes, put them in the scripting language, see if that sounds good. Oh my God, that does not sound good. All right, generate 40 different sounds, put that in, see if that sounds good, and experiment that way.
That's cool. It's a really unique way of approaching it. I haven't really seen anybody else do it that way. Yeah, if you ever, outside of this conversation, want to talk about theory, instrumentation, orchestration, that kind of stuff, I love talking about that stuff too.
Oh yeah. I definitely would, and it's something. I mean, I've always been interested in that, and just sort of like everything's cool. I like everything. But having worked on this, it's definitely given me an appreciation for just like what that work actually involves, right? And the different ways that those things like play off of each other. I mean, this is probably the most like obvious thing in the world to someone that has practiced with this, but because most of my like musical experience is just like improvising. I just start playing something on the piano, I start playing something on the guitar, and because of that, you tend to always focus on the quality of the sound like by itself, right? And one thing that I was surprised about on this game is sometimes I would like, let's say, record some guitar sounds, and then I would be listening to them, on their own, and I would have a bad feeling. I'd be like, oh, this, like, I was not playing that very well. This does not sound great. This probably isn't going to work. But then I put it in the game, and once, the strings are coming in and the horns are playing and the percussion is going on, it's like the way that the sum of the wave files, comes together, it works, right? Sometimes that's like it's maybe in the mix, it's kind of masking the grading part that I don't like. But also it's just the way these things come together kind of highlights different qualities and stuff. That I found really interesting working on this, and was not something I had any real experience with before. So that was very very fun and gratifying to work with.
So with your game out now, do you have any specific goals in terms of like financial goals or sale numbers or anything like that?
I mean, of course, my answer would be the most possible, right? Like to generate as much revenue for the next game, and for me, that's really more about being able to afford like hiring people to work with. Like I really liked the artists that I worked with on this project. I think they really made the game something special that it wouldn't. I mean, I'm proud of the design, I'm proud of the audio and things, but I think without that visual quality, the game would just not be what it is today. So I would love to make money to hire them to work on the next project, or hire someone else that's interested. Um, but for me, like right now, my primary goal would just be to get as many eyes on the game and as many controllers in people's hands. Like I said, I mean, my primary job is teaching, that supports me, that lets me continue being as independent as possible, which is something that I really value, because I think good game design is something that just sometimes just takes time, right? It's not something you can actually like force your way through. Sometimes you just need to say, hey, I'm going to take a month and go do something. Like I'll start working on a different game, or I'm going to start focusing on the music for this project or whatever. And then you come back and you have kind of a breakthrough on the design. So I don't necessarily want the next project to be like on a, like, let's just say if this game made like $250,000, I wouldn't necessarily want to budget out production schedule and say, okay, well, with $250,000, let's hire 4 people and get this game out in 18 months, right? Because then I might have to make certain sacrifices in terms of just design and the kind of marination time of things. So really, I would just like as many people to play the game as possible because I think it's really cool and interesting. It's a type of game that I want there to be more of. I love like arcade action games. Things like Ikaruga, Radiant Silvergun are some games that I really enjoy. So I also think it's doing really interesting things with music, and I'd love people to experience that.
How are you getting eyes on the game, and have you learned any marketing tactics that work better than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a publisher for this game, Page to Pixel Publishing. We didn't have them at the beginning when I took the game to PAX in Boston. I met them there and they picked up the game. So I've definitely learned a lot from them about marketing. That their background is more in marketing stuff. So things that I wouldn't either I wouldn't have even known to like think about, or maybe just as like a jaded art person I wouldn't have even thought of. But just the actual process of like creating an ad, running that ad, like paying for that ad to run on a website is more successful than I would have assumed. Because me personally, I just tend to like ignore ads. Maybe it's just that I have enough things on my Steam wish list, so I'm like, well, if I hear about a game from a friend, I'll go play that. I don't need more noise in the mix. But that's definitely been one thing. Just the process of like reaching out to people, running ads on different websites and stuff. Another aspect of that is localization, right? Like localizing those ads in different languages, finding different markets. Like the game, surprisingly, has had a lot of traffic just from Japan. We localized it into Japanese like relatively early. Of course, a lot of the influence of the game are Japanese games. So, that's stuff that either I don't have the capacity to think about or the bandwidth, or just would have never occurred to me for like, oh well, hey, there's a lot of people that buy games, so when I make an ad, like let's show it to people in Mexico, let's show it to people in Japan. So that's one thing. Another thing that I would say that I've learned this, but like that maybe implies that I'm better at it than I was at the beginning, and I don't necessarily want to say that. But the most success I've had marketing the game is really from two fronts. One is just going to conventions. That has been something. I tend to be a bit of a shut-in. Like I just, it's easier to stay at home and read a book or something. But going out to places like PAX or DreamHack here in Dallas, or TinyCon, the Society of Play runs, and just getting the game in players' hands and like showing stuff, that has been a really gratifying experience that I'm very glad that I did. My last game was like a puzzle game, so most of the way I would get feedback is just kind of like show it off in discords and groups. But those tend to be developers and not players, right? So taking it to conventions has been very good, and I think that's been the most successful like marketing push that we've done, right? It's very nice. I've had people come up to me at PAX and say that this was their favorite thing that they had played, and that they're really into the game. So that's great. Part of that is of course just the ego boost of actually getting to just see a stranger like play your game and like it. That's very nice. And then the other thing is TikTok has just been more successful for this. I don't really have a Twitter following, so I'm sure some people that already had maybe a Twitter base built up from their first game are still doing well with like Screenshot Saturday and things like that. But I found just like posting things on TikTok, I feel like I'm getting different different players, different people every time that I'm doing that. I feel like Twitter tends to be a little bit more insular to like the indie game scene, right? Or developers or people that are really interested in this game. whether or not that actually matters much from like a financial or business standpoint of, maybe what you want as a business is to not just like get random people on TikTok, but get, reviewers that look for things on Twitter. That's, still up in the air, I think. But I like that process. I also just like the format of doing TikToks and stuff for games. I think it's showing a visual medium in kind of like a punchy way is cool. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly good at it. I think I've learned a lot about at least how to edit videos and show off this game on TikTok. But of course, that's a difficult thing about games is each game tends to be very unique. And so who knows how many of the lessons I've learned this time will necessarily translate to like the next project. But yeah, that's I wish I knew more about marketing, I guess, is the summary.
Oh,
there.
Don't we all?
Yeah, exactly.
And it seems to be universal with everybody I talk to in games and music. That's the most challenging puzzle piece to figure out. Do you have any advice for somebody who is starting to their game development? Well, I know you're a teacher, so is there any like recurring advice that you find yourself giving over and over?
So there's obviously like 100 technical details that that are important. I think the big thing for me, and this is partially because it's the piece of advice that I was the most resistant to for the longest amount of time, was to be involved in some community for game development. I think for me, that has been a local community that I tend to have an easier time being able to like go to a place in person and hang out with people than I do, just like haunting a Discord chat. That's, a hard mental space for me. But, getting involved in like game jams, showing off your work, seeing what other people are doing. Um, I read a quote from Brian Eno recently where he was talking about this term he had called scenius, right? It's like genius, but for a scene, right? And he's talking about like scientific scenes and music scenes, this kind of like collectives of artists and people working together. And, you can really feel the difference between like, East Coast and West Coast hip hop, for example, right? Or, between different styles of punk music or, classical composers or jazz or whatever. So I think that taking game development as an opportunity to be involved and be involved like seriously and devotedly into a community is, I think, a really important thing because no one knows who you are. No one will have any way to find out who you are until you kind of like go out there and try to engage with people and learn advice from other people and bring your own unique input and perspective into that scene. So that's one thing. The other is just, and of course every game developer says this, but just like make a lot of games, right? Just like keep making games, and this is particularly true for myself teaching a lot of students, right? Most people, they have a game, right? A dream game that they want to make. And some people have the good sense to know, well, I'm not ready to make it yet, but I'll go to school and then I'll be ready. And the answer is usually like, well, okay, after you go to school though, this game still takes $10 million, right? It still takes like 150 people and $10 million at like minimum is way more than $10 million usually. It takes a lot of time and a lot of people and a lot of money to make things at that scale. So you, you, I think there is something to be said for, working on your passion project. That's certainly something that I did in the beginning is just, a big ambitious idea and trying to learn all the pieces. Like, okay, how does 3D animation work, right? How do dialogue trees work? How does sound work? All these things. But at a certain point, it is important to just get the practice of building things from beginning to end, building a complete project that you can show someone and communicates and shows them something like interesting and meaningful to you. And making small games doesn't just mean do a copy paste of Pong, do a copy paste of Asteroids. They can still be like really interesting, expressive, and meaningful games. And so that's a thing I try a lot to do in class is to show off games that I think have like really unique and novel and important ideas about them, but are also something that even a beginner can look at and go, well, maybe I can't do that like in the next 2 months, but I can see a road to start working there where I would be able to build that, in the future. And so like some examples of those are a lot of the puzzle script games that have come out of the kind of like thinky puzzle game community that Alan Hazelden runs. I think a lot of those are great examples. They're artistically very simple, very bare bones pixelated games, but they can have a lot of mechanical depth to them, which is really great. Um, I've also been over the last like year or so, I've been increasingly inspired by some of the work which sometimes has been called like game poems, is kind of the broad categorization of them. It doesn't really describe a genre of games, but these are things that tend to be very short and have very direct kind of mechanical ideas to them. But still have a ton of really like expressive range. So like Passage by Jason Rohr or Terrorist Killer would be some examples that I would give of those games. That again, it's like you can play that game in like 5 minutes and you'll get I think a really thoughtful and meaningful experience out of those. So make stuff like that. Like everyone can figure out how to do that. It's easier than making I don't know, Assassin's Creed or whatever people.
Well, thanks. That's great advice. Before we go, is there anything else that you want to share or plug?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the Art of Flight would love people to check that out. I'll say if you are a game developer, whether you're local to Dallas or not, definitely check out the Society of Play. I know I've mentioned it a few times, but it's a nonprofit for game developers. It's I think just a really wonderful community of people sharing their work and helping each other out. And I know a lot of people there who, started out as, novices, right? People and maybe just hobbyists who have gone on to make really, really important things on their own, or gone to work in, bigger teams and created games that way. So if you're a developer that is at all kind of like yearning for that sense of community, or even just wants to like do a cool game jam or something, they have really great game jam themes. Definitely check out the Society of Play.
Awesome. Well, Colin, thanks. It was great talking to you, learning about you and your game and all the advice you shared. So thanks for being here, and I wish you the best of luck with the game.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun chatting.